Funny thing about retirement towns, folks come here thinking they'll find peace. What they actually find is time. And time, my friend, is a dangerous thing when you've got too much of it and not enough truth. Name's Walt. 71 this fall. Married to my wife, Ruth, going on 40 years. We moved here 3 years ago, figuring we'd trade the big city noise for some lake views and potluck dinners. Worked fine for a while. We'd settled in. She joined the local travel nostalgia club, which, to me, sounded like a bunch of old folks swapping brochures and war stories about missed flights. But Ruth loved it. A way to see the world without leaving town, she'd said. I nodded and let her have it. Gave me more time to fiddle with my workshop and work on the old 66 Ford Outback. But about 6 months ago, the first postcard showed up. No return address. Just a sun-faded picture of Rome's Trevi Fountain. Front of it was standard tourist fare. The back? Thinking of you, as always. Handwritten. No signature. I remember Ruth reading it at the breakfast table, smiling a little too long. From the club, she explained, tucking it into a drawer. I grunted. Didn't think much of it then. Until the next one came. And the next. Every 2 weeks like clockwork. Paris. London. Vienna. Always the same line. Thinking of you, as always. Same looping script. Same smirk on her face when she read it. Now, I've been in insurance for 45 years. You learn to spot patterns. And this one? It smelled wrong. Not that I said anything, not yet. But I started watching. She kept the postcards in her craft room, neatly arranged in a small box. One night, while she was at her club meeting, I looked closer. Not stalking, just inspecting. I traced my finger over the script. It sparked something in the back of my mind, familiar, but I couldn't place it. Not yet. Then came the next clue. At a local brunch, an old friend of ours, Dottie, mentioned casually, saw Ruth at Tony's Cafe last week. Looked like she was having quite the chat. I arched a brow. With who? Dottie shrugged. Some gentleman. Tall, gray hair. Looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. I sipped my coffee. Didn't mention it to me. Dottie laughed. Well, you know Ruth, always full of surprises. Yeah, no kidding. I filed that away. The next week, another postcard. This time, Lake Como. And suddenly it clicked. The handwriting. I remembered it, from a wedding guest book we'd looked at years ago. It belonged to Tom Landry, Ruth's old high school flame, who, according to the community bulletin, had moved back to town 2 months prior. Now the puzzle pieces lined up fast. Tom had been engaged once, to Ruth's sister, Ellen. But Ellen passed young. And Tom had vanished from everyone's radar until now. Clearly, Ruth hadn't just found travel nostalgia at her club. She'd found an old flame with an active pin and an open calendar. I dug a little deeper. Asked a few discreet questions around the lunch crowd. Turns out Ruth and Tom had been seen together more than once, always at quiet cafes, always midweek. And always alone. I could have confronted her. Could have demanded answers. But where's the satisfaction in that? No. If she was going to play this game, I was going to write the ending. Our 40th anniversary was approaching, big dinner planned, friends and neighbors invited. And I had just the perfect gift in mind. I gathered every postcard, had them scanned and printed into a large collage, elegant frame, museum quality. At the bottom, in bold script. For the woman who likes to collect more than just stamps. Subtle enough for the room. Pointed enough for Ruth. And Tom? Oh, I had a little extra planned for him. But that, my friend, is a story for next time. The thing about laying a trap is you've got to enjoy the waiting. Most folks can't. They jump too soon. Shout too loud. Tip their hand. Not me. I had 40 years of watching human nature under my belt. 40 years of listening to clients claim their dog had eaten the premium check or that they'd misplaced the deed. People lie in predictable patterns. And Ruth? She'd chosen her pattern now. All I had to do was let her weave the rest of it. The week after I planned the collage, I played it cool. Talked about the anniversary dinner like nothing had changed. Thinking the lakeside in this year, I suggested one evening. Nice big space, plenty of room for everyone. She brightened. Oh yes, perfect. Her voice was too light. Too quick. I noticed her glance at her phone more that week. Furtive little checks between stirring the soup or watering the ficus. At one point, I caught a glimpse, message preview. Just the initials TL. Tom Landry. Of course. The man had been a ghost in our past for decades. The fiancé of her late sister Ellen, a tragedy that had fractured the family like a dry branch. And yet here he was, sending postcards like a schoolboy and sipping coffee with my wife while I rebuilt the truck out back. Ruth never mentioned him. Not once. That was the real betrayal. Not the postcards. Not the lunches. The lie by omission. And now, after all these years, she'd woven this fresh little romance in the shadows of a marriage built on dust and habit. But she'd underestimated one thing. I might be old. I might be slower than I once was. But I hadn't lost my edge. As the dinner approached, I had the framed collage delivered to the Lakeside Inn's event coordinator. No signature. Just instructions to place it on the main gift table after dessert. Position it dead center. Can't miss it. Meanwhile, I kept fishing. One afternoon, I asked my old friend Carl, a local who'd known Ruth's family back when Ellen was alive. You remember that fella Ellen was engaged to? What was his name again? Carl squinted. Tom Landry. Tall guy. Always had a thing for Ruth, even back then. I blinked. Oh. Carl nodded slowly. Yeah. Small town, Walt. People forget faces, but they don't forget stories. Tom had eyes for Ruth long before Ellen. After Ellen passed, he vanished. Guess some ghosts don't stay buried. That sealed it. Ruth wasn't just rekindling a fling. She was walking through graves. And she was about to get a wake-up call. The night of the dinner came. I shaved, pressed my best Navy suit, slipped on the watch Ruth gave me for our 25th, ironic, in a way. Time was still ticking. The Lakeside Inn buzzed with our guests, about 50 folks from the neighborhood, old friends, the occasional stray club member. Ruth looked radiant, silver dress, pearl earrings. But beneath the shimmer, her eyes flicked about, scanning. For him. I knew it. And sure enough, 20 minutes in, I spotted him. Tom Landry. Gray hair, still tall, leaning in the corner nursing a glass of wine. He hadn't RSVP'd, of course. But Ruth must have tipped him off. He kept his distance at first. Watched the crowd. Watched us. I kept my face smooth as lake ice. Dinner came and went. Laughter, speeches. I played the perfect host. But when dessert arrived, so did my little surprise. Right on cue, the framed collage appeared on the gift table, gleaming under the chandelier. I watched Ruth freeze when she saw it. A flicker of confusion, then dread. I rose, tapped my glass. Friends, I said, voice even. Before we cut the cake, a small token of appreciation for my dear Ruth. Heads turned. I gestured to the frame. For a woman who spent her life collecting memories, and, apparently, a few more things along the way. I paused. Let the words hang. Including postcards, each one with a message of love from a very familiar hand. A ripple ran through the room. Ruth's face drained. Tom shifted, suddenly far too interested in the floor. I walked over, lifted the frame for all to see. Each postcard arranged in a perfect spiral, with one line in bold beneath. For the woman who likes to collect more than just stamps. Gasps. Whispers. Ruth swayed slightly, one hand gripping the back of her chair. Tom turned to leave too late. Clarissa, yes, same Clarissa from the garden club days, caught his arm. Well now, she said loudly. Isn't this a blast from the past? That was the match to the powder keg. The room erupted. Questions flew. I started. Ruth sank into her chair, trembling. I simply stood there, glass raised. To 40 years of discoveries. And I drank. No yelling. No accusations. Just the cold slap of truth, laid bare. Tom fled. Ruth couldn't. And me? I sat back down, slicing into my cake with steady hands. The night wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Because the biggest twist was still waiting in the wings, and Ruth had no idea it was about to land. The thing about a public reveal is this. It doesn't end when the cake's cut. No, the real mess starts once folks go home and the gossip starts to simmer. And boy, did it simmer. By noon the next day, I couldn't swing a cane at the town square without catching someone's curious glance. That's Walt Masters. You heard about the dinner, right? You see that postcard collage? Poor Ruth. Poor man. 40 years and that's how it ends. I wasn't bothered. I'd played my hand knowing full well what chips would fall. Ruth, though, not so composed. She hadn't come home that night. And when she finally did, late morning, looking 10 years older and stiff as cold linen, she barely met my eye. I was on the porch, polishing the Ford's chrome trim. She stood in the doorway a long moment, then stepped out. I never meant for that to happen, she said, voice raw. I didn't look up. Funny. Postcards sure kept happening. She swallowed. I thought it was harmless. That earned a laugh. Harmless. I turned then, wiping my hands on a rag. Lying to your husband, Sneaking around with your dead sister's fiancé, that's what passes for harmless these days? She flinched. And there it was. Confirmation. I'd suspected the connection, but now I had her words. You knew, I said flatly. Her eyes brimmed. I didn't plan it. He found me through the club. It happened. I leaned against the truck. No, you let it happen. She broke then, collapsed onto the porch swing in a mess of tears and guilt. I stayed standing. I'd shed my tears years ago, when I first saw this marriage for the quiet, duty-bound thing it had become. But now it was something else entirely. A facade crumbling in broad daylight. When her sobs subsided, she looked up. Please don't tell them. I frowned. Tell who? She swallowed. The others. The club. About Tom. About Ellen. Now that was interesting. She wasn't worried about our marriage. She was worried about the image. Typical. You mean they don't know? I asked, voice mild. She shook her head, trembling. No one knows. I never told them he was Ellen's fiancé. I thought. It was so long ago. I thought it wouldn't matter. I let that hang a moment, then said, it matters to me. And with that, I walked inside. Left her to the porch in her shame. The phone rang nonstop that day. Friends. Neighbors. Club members. Clarissa, again, that woman had a nose for drama, called to offer me tea and unbiased ears. I declined. I wasn't after sympathy. I was after truth. And Ruth had just confirmed the biggest piece. That night, I went to my office and opened the old wedding album. Sure enough, third page in, a photo of Ellen and Tom, arm in arm. Young. Radiant. A caption in Ruth's handwriting. So happy for them both. Bit of bitter irony now. But here's the kicker. Tucked behind the page was a folded letter, yellowed, fragile. Curious, I unfolded it. Dearest Ruth. You know my heart has always struggled between what is right and what it wants. I loved Ellen, but I will always carry a part of you with me. Perhaps in another life. Tom. The date? 2 months before Ellen's wedding. Well now, seems the seeds of this affair were sown long before I ever walked into Ruth's life. And that, my friend, changed everything. Because now this wasn't just a betrayal of a marriage. It was a betrayal of a sister, of a family. And Ruth had buried it, all of it, for 40 years. Until the postcards started bringing those ghosts right back to the surface. I stared at that letter a long time, then carefully slipped it into a new envelope, labeled it, and set it aside. The game wasn't over yet. Ruth thought she was protecting an image. But soon, the town would know the full truth, and she'd have to face the past she'd tried so hard to erase. Because some ghosts, my friend, they don't stay buried. And this one was about to come knocking. By Monday morning, the town's rumor mill was in full spin. I couldn't walk into Joe's diner without someone offering a sly glance or a thinly veiled question. Quite the anniversary dinner, Walt. Those postcards, what a creative gift. Creative, sure. Cold? You bet. And I hadn't even played my last card yet. Ruth, meanwhile, was unraveling. I watched it happen in small doses. She stopped attending her club meetings, stopped answering calls from certain friends. One afternoon, I overheard her tearfully trying to cancel an upcoming luncheon. Oh, I'm not feeling well. Yes, I know, it's just not the right time. Translation. Word had spread, and she was cornered. But the kicker came 2 days later, when Clarissa called. Again, that woman had radar for scandal. Walt, she said, I've heard a little more about our friend Tom. I sat up. Oh. Clarissa's tone was brisk. It seems he's been seen with more than one woman in town lately. And not just for coffee. I chuckled. Busy man. Indeed. And one of those women mentioned something curious. That Ruth had history with Tom. Family history. Bingo. The pieces were moving. And I had just the proof to push it over the edge, the letter from the wedding album. Now, I don't usually play puppet master. But some wrongs need setting right properly. So I arranged a quiet meeting. Clarissa, myself, and 2 other well-placed club members who'd attended the dinner. We met at Clarissa's sunroom, light, airy, deceptively innocent. I laid out the letter on the glass table. Clarissa read it twice, lips thinning. Well, she said, this explains quite a bit. The others nodded grimly. One spoke up. We need to address this at the next club meeting. The members deserve to know the full truth. I leaned back. Just make sure Ruth's the one who has to face it. Clarissa smiled, cold and sharp. Oh, she will. And with that, the stage was set. The next club meeting, a week away, would see the final curtain fall. In the meantime, Ruth tried her best damage control. She baked pies for the neighbors, dropped off flowers at the church, smiled too wide at the grocers. But it was like trying to patch a sinking ship with tissue paper. People talked. And when people talk, they remember. The postcards had been the first crack. The revelation that Tom was Ellen's fiancé, that would be the collapse. The night before the meeting, Ruth tried once more. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, face pale. "Walt," she began, voice thin. "Please, don't let them do this." I poured myself a coffee. "Do what?" "Destroy me. I made mistakes, but not everything should be aired like this." I sipped the coffee. "Ruth, you spent decades hiding the truth. You don't get to decide how or when it comes out now." Tears welled. "I'll lose everything." I met her gaze, flat as stone. "You already did. You just haven't accepted it yet." And with that, I left her to her ghosts. The morning of the meeting, the town buzzed like a hive. Everyone knew something was coming. At the clubhouse, the air was thick with anticipation. Clarissa chaired the meeting with her usual poise. Halfway through, she cleared her throat. "One final matter of transparency," she said, voice clear. She produced the letter, now carefully preserved in a sleeve, and read it aloud. The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. Ruth sat frozen, color draining from her face. When Clarissa finished, she laid the letter down. It appears certain relationships were not as they seemed. And some histories, long buried, have come back to light. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. The glances spoke volumes. And Ruth? She stood slowly, hands trembling. I never meant." Her voice cracked. And with that, she fled the room, doors swinging shut behind her. I stayed seated, watched the ripple spread, and sipped my coffee. Sometimes, the best revenge is a slow one that lets the truth do the talking. And now, Ruth had no lies left to hide behind. The town knew. The club knew. And soon, even Tom would feel the chill. But that, my friend, that was still to come. Because one more move remained. And it would be the coldest yet. By the end of that club meeting, Ruth had no corner left to hide in. The letter had done its job, better than I'd even hoped. The whispers that followed were a low hum across town. You know how small towns work. First it's the club members, then the grocer, then your plumber's sister-in-law. By Friday, you'd think Ruth was public enemy number one. The funny part? I hadn't said a word since. Didn't need to. Truth, once unboxed, takes on a life of its own. I caught sight of Tom 2 days later. Saw him duck into Tony's cafe around noon, pulling his ball cap low like a guilty schoolboy. Word was out about him too, about the postcards, about his little rendezvous with Ruth. And more damning still, about that letter. Clarissa made sure of it. She was like a conductor guiding an orchestra of polite social ruin. Just transparency, she'd said. And sure enough, transparency had made Ruth about as welcome in town circles as a fox in a henhouse. But I wasn't done yet. See, one piece still nagged at me. Those postcards. Who'd mailed them? Tom? Or Ruth herself, trying to stoke some long-dead embers? Curiosity got the better of me. I paid a visit to the postmaster, Fred, old buddy of mine from Rotary. Over coffee, I asked casually, "Say, you seen a bunch of postcards come through lately, foreign stamps? No return address?" Fred scratched his chin. "Funny you mention it. Few months back, Ruth dropped off a whole stack herself. Said they were for her nostalgia club. Well now, that was rich. So at least some of those cards hadn't come from Tom at all. Ruth had been feeding her own fantasy. Or worse, laying a breadcrumb trail to justify what came next. Either way, it fit. And it gave me the last piece for my endgame. The club's annual Founders' Tea was approaching, a big event, all the old guard attending. Clarissa was already planning it, with a gleam in her eye. "I suppose," she said to me, "you'll want to attend." I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. I spent the next week assembling my final little present. Took that collage frame, added a new row. This time, the photos of Ruth mailing the postcards herself. Fred had kindly let me snap a few security stills from their system, nothing illegal, mind you. Just neighborly transparency. Printed them in crisp black and white. Underneath, one simple line. When you write your own love story, remember who's reading it. Subtle, elegant, brutal. The day of the tea arrived bright and cool. The clubhouse buzzed with polite chatter and veiled curiosity. Ruth hadn't been seen in days. But she came and had to, really. Too many eyes would notice her absence. She looked thinner, worn, smile brittle as old glass. Tom didn't show. Coward. As the tea unfolded, Clarissa called for a moment of reflection on integrity and honesty within our cherished community. And right then, the The staff rolled out the gift table. Front and center, my updated collage. Ruth saw it instantly. Her breath caught. She half rose, then sat again, trembling. Clarissa, all grace and ice, gestured toward it. An anonymous contribution, she said smoothly. A reminder that sometimes we must face the stories we craft. Silence. A few gasps. Then the buzz began. Women leaned toward each other, whispering. Men exchanged knowing glances. And Ruth? She stood abruptly, knocked her chair back, and fled, again, through the same doors she'd run through the week before. I watched her go. No smile this time, just quiet satisfaction. The truth had done its work. And Tom? From what I heard, he'd skipped town already, couldn't take the heat. Good riddance. Later, as the crowd thinned, Clarissa approached. You are a cold man, Walt Masters. I met her gaze. Not cold, I said. Just thorough. She laughed, a dry, knowing sound. Well, she said, if there's a moral here, I suppose it's that some debts always get paid. I raised my glass. To paid debts. And that, my friend, was that. Ruth faded from public view after that. Sold off her social memberships. Stopped attending luncheons. Word was, she was considering moving closer to her niece out west. I didn't stop her. Didn't speak to her again. Didn't need to. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's the silence that follows. The absence that speaks volumes. And as for me, I sit on my porch these days, watching the town go by. 40 years of marriage taught me patience. One box of postcards taught me something better, that sometimes the sharpest knife is the one you sharpen slowly. And when it cuts, it leaves no wound to mend. You'd think after the founder's tea, after the photos, the whispers, the tears, that Ruth would have gotten the message. But some folks, they can't leave well enough alone. 3 days later, a cream-colored envelope showed up in my mailbox. No stamp. No postmark. Just my name in familiar, shaky handwriting. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and poured myself a drink. Let it sit there an hour. Maybe 2. Finally, curiosity won. I sliced it open with my pocket knife. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Neatly written. Walt, please. I know I've hurt you beyond words. I was foolish. I was weak. But I can't stand this silence. Can we at least talk? One last time? Ruth. No apology for Ellen. No mention of the letter. No acknowledgement of the deeper betrayal. Typical. It wasn't me she wanted to talk to. It was her own conscience she couldn't quiet. And that, I figured, was punishment enough. I set the letter aside. Didn't respond. Didn't need to. By the weekend, word had spread further than even I'd imagined. Ruth's closest friends, the few who hadn't outright shunned her, were keeping their distance. Tom? Gone. Rumor had it he'd left town entirely, skipping on a few debts in the process. Seems the man was as committed to responsibility as he was to decency. I heard this through Clarissa, of course, who relished every sordid detail. Walt, she told me over coffee, if it's any consolation, Tom Landry won't be welcome in polite circles again. I nodded. It's consolation enough. But here's where the real twist came. You remember that old wedding album? The letter I found tucked behind Ellen's photo? Well, I'd kept digging. Turns out Ruth had more skeletons in that closet than just Tom. Among the album pages, I found an envelope addressed to both Ellen and Ruth. Written by their mother, God rest her. My dears, I know you both carry secrets in your hearts. But blood matters more than past loves. Ruth, promise me you'll let go of what can never be. And Ellen, forgive what you cannot change. The date? 1 month before Ellen's wedding. The implication was clear. Their mother had known, had tried in vain to keep peace. And Ruth? She hadn't let go. Not then. Not now. She'd waited decades. And when Tom came back, she'd snatched at the chance like a drowning woman grabs for air. But ghosts don't make good lovers. And some debts, as Clarissa said, always get paid. I copied that second letter. Slipped it, anonymously, to one of the remaining club officers. Let the truth complete its circle. And me? I kept the original. Tucked it back into the album, where it belonged. The final scene came 2 weeks later. A for sale sign popped up in front of our house. Ruth was moving west to her niece's, as predicted. She tried to tell me in person, knocking softly on my workshop door. I didn't answer. Some conversations don't need to happen. Instead, I watched from the porch as the moving van pulled up one bright morning. Ruth emerged last. Thin. Tired. Carrying one small box. She paused at the bottom of the steps. Looked up at me. Eyes hollow. No words passed between us. Just a long, final glance. Then she climbed into the car and drove away. I sat there a while longer, finished my bourbon, and thought about Ellen, about how sometimes the past writes its own ending, no matter how hard you try to script it otherwise. In the end, I'd done what needed doing. Exposed the truth, let the town see, and walked away with my conscience clear. No victory lap, no forgiveness sought or given. Just the cold satisfaction that comes when a lie, no matter how carefully built, finally shatters in full view. And as the sun dipped below the oaks, I closed the album one last time. Some stories, my friend, are better left on the shelf. Subscribe to the channel